The paradox marched on through snow and song.
But there's a storm to me, a name to find, a friend whose silence haunts my mind. With every mile and every bend, I chased the girl I called my friend. And
its mechanical legs squeaked and hissed across the icy ridges of Velgrad, less like a warship, more like a particularly eccentric stork. It flew sometimes, it waddled mostly. 4 daughters of 4 distant lands watched the world change from within its steam-cradled hull. In the morning, a mechanical owl landed on deck, its wings still ticking from flight. It blinked twice and dropped a bundle of letters into Anastasia's hands. One bore the sigil of the Queen, former Sieving. Another, the stern mark of Lord Alaric Durov, cold, precise. And then, softer parchment, her father's handwriting, gentle and a bit disappointed, but loving all the same. She read them all in silence. Snow turned to wind, wind to stone. Peaks rose like broken teeth, and the paradox waddled steadily up into the cold. At the edge of Velgrad lay a stone gate, high and grim, Theunbach's border. Armed guards emerged, weapons drawn. They asked questions, stern and precise. And then Princess Sieglinde came forward. She jumped from the ship on her noble steed. Her presence changed everything. The horn sounded, the gates opened. They paraded into the border town to the swelling strains for flame and steel.
this is my land of flame and steel, where hearts don't bend and cold winds heal. The snow may bite.
And later her second song, The Armor I Choose.
This is the armor I choose, not a prison, not a bruise.
It was short-lived glory, but the people remembered. The girls didn't stay long, and the paradox, being a creature of momentum, promptly hopped over the next wall and waddled off into the wilderness. 2 days later, the paradox lurched to a stop. Out of steam? No, there was still pressure left in the tanks. That's when Nandi saw it, a figure on the path, half buried in frost. They pulled him aboard. He was gaunt, bruised by wind and cold. Anastasia swore to warm him with her body heat, but rather than scandal, it meant sitting quietly beside him with a book, waiting for his breathing to steady. He gave her his name, Tallinn, nothing more. With steam dwindling and no clear road ahead, Sieglinde spotted a crooked road marker, Kalksteinquell. Mist became warmth, frost turned to damp air and hidden forest. And there, hidden in the folds of the mountain, was a mostly forgotten village, abandoned, save for a grand old mansion and a temper that refused to crumble. The paradox sputtered and wheezed to a halt. They went on foot. Inside the mansion, they found quiet, warmth and blessed stillness, and baths, glorious baths. Emil cleared the building and promptly walked into a room full of royal nakedness and nearly died from blood loss. He retreated quickly, citing duty. The girls took to the waters with glee. They played chicken fight, splashed and sang beneath the steam. Later that night, Anastasia and Tallinn found themselves alone in the workshop, working on rerouting steam from the hot spring into the paradox spoiler. The hands brushed once, the cheeks too. They didn't speak of it. Dinner that evening was interrupted by a visitor, an old priest in fire order robes, Brother Ranulf, keeper of the last rites, the temper and the flame. He spoke quietly of forgotten duties, of villagers who left, of prayers no one spoke anymore. He alone stayed, as was required. Suddenly, the door slammed open with a windburst. In strode Berend Sturmreiter, dust-caked boots, a cloak snapping like a banner behind him. The elite captain of the courier line Dornhafen Velgrad never knocked. Duty permitted no such delay. He saluted sharply, eyes fixed on Anastasia. Letters for Her Highness, Anastasia Morozova. He placed 2 envelopes before her, one sealed with Prince Alaric's predictable sigil, the other bearing Kalliope's silver moon. Then he pivoted on his heel, vanished through the doorway, and was gone between heartbeats. The next day, Tallinn was already outside before dawn, shirtless in the cold, rerouting pressure lines from the hot springs into the paradox. Anastasia flushed. They worked side by side, finishing the line just as steam began to hiss again. The 4-legged airship lived once more. But peace never stays long. The next morning, Irene whispered to them, "There are people outside, watching." Figures emerged from the fog, cloaked, silent as dusk. One was pale, marked with the tattoos of the fire priests of Theunbach. The other, smaller and lean, wore the skin and steel of the south. His eyes, burnished and hard, their leader, spoke with unnerving calm, demanding the boy in exchange for the girls' lives. They had come for Tallinn, but Sieglinde stepped forward, sword in hand, voice steady, and challenged them to single combat. The southern warrior accepted. The duel was swift. Steel met snow. Sieglinde struck him down in a decisive blow. The shadows behind him shifted. His people, disciplined and purposeful, retreated. but the fire priest refused. Enraged, he barked orders and drew his blade. A dozen cloaked shapes surged forward at his command. They never reached the target. Kumiko moved like a drowned bowstring. In a blur of motion, she unsheathed her hidden blade, silver like moonlight, and then the fire priest and his followers collapsed, defeated before the blades left their scabbards. The mountain trembled. A low, ancient groan echoed from the earth. Lava stirred in the deep. The god of fire had been awoken, and the princesses fled, racing down the winding path with the paradox wheezing steam and courage in equal measure. The old village was spared, but the mountain behind them raged. The paradox leapt from the cliff, glided into the valley, and ran. In the safety of motion, they confronted Talon. He didn't lie, but his truth was incomplete. He was the Prince of Namarra, Kalliope's brother, hunted on a mission. And then, behind them, cavalry. Enemy riders gained, and just when the paradox could run no more, salvation appeared once again. The banner of the Silberwacht. Count to Emmerich, Sieglinde's fiancé, charged from the east, swept around the paradox and scattered the pursuers in one fell swoop. He leapt aboard. Sieglinde ran into his arms, and for a moment, the road and the path disappeared. Just two people holding on. Then, just before the city gates loomed, a solitary rider crested the hill. Berend, Sturmreiter, saluted with military precision and wordless gravity. He held out a weathered satchel of letters. "For Her Highness, next of kin," he said. "These letters can't be delivered." One letter in Kalliope's hand was written as though she had never left. One was from her uncle, and one, a delicate paper, scented faintly, was signed with a single letter, S. Berend gave no explanation. Then he was gone again, smoke to wind, a man of saddle and silence. Dornhaven was stone, iron and salt, a city shaped by waves and war. In its harbor, sails clinked like distant bells. The princesses were invited to a state banquet, a grand hall lit by braziers and chandeliers. Nobles lined the long table, speaking in clipped tones. There was no music, only the scrape of cutlery and the murmurs of politics. Anastasia's station drew quiet attention, but it was Sieglinde who held the room. This was her kingdom. And here she was not merely a traveling princess. They dined beside her father, the Grandmaster, Lord Wolfram von Theunbach. But one face was missing. The high flame priest, her father's old advisor, was nowhere to be seen. In his place a new man, cold-eyed, smiling too thin. When Sieglinde inquired later, her father only said, "Men disappear, others take the place. That's how it has always been." But something in his voice faltered. After the banquet, when the nobles had vanished into the towers and chambers, Lord Wolfram asked Sieglinde to stay. There was no ceremony, no guards, only him and the crackling hearth. Wordlessly, he held up a sealed letter, the Queen of Velgrad sigil bright against the parchment. Her command was clear: halt the road trip, secure the heir, return her to Velgrad. He turned to his daughter, his voice low, rough as flint. "Velgrad is fractured. The heir is here now, under your watch. We could use that leverage. So tell me, daughter, what would you do? Would you return her, or would you use her?" Silence. The only sound was the fire cracking. Sieglinde stood straight. Her voice was steady. "I would let her go, because what we are forging here, father, is a bond stronger than treaties. Let her walk beside us, not as a hostage, but as a sister." Lord Wolfram was still for a long moment. Then the smallest smile creased the corner of his mouth. "Good, you answered not like a daughter, but like a ruler." Then, without a word, he fed the letter to the flames. The paper curled and turned to ash. "Still, best you all be gone before Her Majesty's patience finds faster wings." This evening, over a table set with steel cutlery and steaming breads, the weight of war gave way, briefly, to warmth. Sieglinde's mother, Eleonore, doted over her daughter and scolded her for skipping meals. "You were always too thin," she muttered, placing a second helping on her daughter's plate, "even when you were a baby." She brought out a small lacquered chest and, to the horror of Sieglinde, began to share childhood drawings, miniature swords carved from soap, and an old stuffed lion with one eye missing. The other princesses were delighted, Sieglinde mortified. Still, questions lingered. There was no mention of the Northern Campaign, no medals, no records. The archives were silent. Her father was silent. Her mother blinked in confusion. "It must have been a training mission," they said. "You remember wrong." But she didn't. She remembered. Something was making people forget. They needed a ship, as the Paradox was built for walking and flying, but not for water. Sieglinde took the Sturmfalke, her mother's ship, and commissioned a steam engine be built into its hull to carry the Paradox and refill it during the ocean travel. They departed the next morning, but without Talon. He was already gone, and left them just a letter. Her mother cried at the departure, partly from pride, partly from the engine's smoke. And so they went into the mist, toward the next kingdom, toward Tsukihana. And as the sea opened before them, Anastasia sang once more, "Where the rain touches sky."
Now I sail where the wild winds cry. where the clouds stretch wide and the shore says goodbye. So